Hey, and welcome to Be the Bridge. I'm your host, Brian Payton Joyner. From the time I was 11, I tried to pray away the gay. But my senior year in college, I realized I could pray and be gay. Each week, I'll share my experiences and chat with others as we build a bridge between the LGBT community and people of faith. Thanks for joining, and let the construction begin. Hello, fellow bridge builders. Thank y'all for joining me today for this 18th episode of Be the Bridge podcast. I'm your host, Brian Payton Joyner, author of the novel The Wisdom of Stones. The novel's about Ben, a college senior, who promised God and his meemaw he'd be a Southern Baptist preacher, but he can't pray away the gay. My guest today is someone who is intersex, chimera specifically, transgender, non-binary, gay, and asexual. Nick Manchester, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. You say all that and it makes me sound a little bit confusing, and here I am just living life.
Well, I think that's one thing that probably a lot of people don't understand about the LGBTQIA plus community. Our identity is important to us, but you're right. For the most part, 99% of the time, we're just living a normal life, and it's not something that's really a big issue. I definitely think it would be helpful for us to go into some of the terminology and describe for people and explain to people some of the differences in some of these words and exactly how you use them to describe yourself.
Sure.
So let's start with the word intersex and chimera specifically. Can you tell us a little bit about intersex and chimera, and then maybe compare that with transgender?
Being a chimera means that you have more than one genotype.
Okay.
I have two, but I know people who have more. For myself, the easiest way to explain it is that I started off in utero as twins, fraternal twins.
Oh, wow.
One was male, the other was female. The world wasn't ready for two of us. They joined forces, and one baby came out instead of two.
Wow.
So my chromosomes are 46XX, 46XY.
Do you know sort of how common that is?
Growing up, I was told that I was the only one on Earth.
Wow.
That there was nobody else like me. I needed to stop asking, that sort of thing.
Wow, this was your parents who said that to you?
Parents, doctors, teachers, psychiatrists, therapists, pastors, you name it.
Wow. They
told me that I was the only one, that I was so rare that there was nobody. And as an adult, though, I know of 18, and this is, I personally know, 18 other intersex chimeras just in the U.S.
Wow.
Some of us have what we call shadows. I call it the mini-me. I guess you would say I'm always me.
Right.
But I have two very distinct sets of likes that are completely opposite of each other. One, I love being outdoors. I love healing with herbs. The other, I'm a complete science fiction junkie.
Right.
For me, part of my brain belongs to one twin and part of my brain belongs to the other.
Wow.
And so it's like the voice inside my head is so different than the voice that I hear. But then also the face in my head is so different from the face that's in the mirror that if I'm tired and I look in the mirror, it's almost shocking because, wait a minute, that's not what I look like.
Wow.
Because I see my twin in my mind's eye.
How does that manifest itself physically in your body?
There's skeletal differences. There's organ differences. For instance, like my hands don't match because one hand belongs to one twin and the other belongs to the other.
Oh, wow.
Which it's really, that comes in really handy when somebody's like, well, how do I know you're not, telling me a tale? And I just show them my hands and I'm like, well, they're different sizes. The fingers are different lengths on each hand. My jaw is actually hinged at a different place on each side, and the bone structure of my jaw is different. And that's true throughout like our entire bodies. Like my shoulders are offset because one shoulder belongs to the male twin, the other belongs to the female twin. My hips are the same way. My knees are jointed at different heights because one leg belongs to one twin, one leg belongs to the other, and that sort of thing. Wow.
Is that something that's common?
Oh, yes. We're very much of the human Rubik's Cube. We kind of we kind of laugh about, we're having problems with our cubes.
Wow. Can you help me understand intersex?
Intersex is any variation physically, chromosomally, hormonally that results in a body that is not male or female. For instance, some people have XY chromosomes, which is typically expected for male, but they have internal gonads instead of ovaries, and they will appear female and often, but not always, identify as female as well.
Okay. So intersex is different from transgender how?
Intersex is different from transgender in that most transgender people do not have intersex bodies. Most transgender people are what we call as endosex, which is simply not intersex. And there's a really big kind of comment right now of, oh, intersex of the brain. And those of us who have intersex bodies are like, wait a second, don't even try to co-opt, the human rights war that we're going through right now, because we have a very real battle for human rights.
Right.
There's a lot of commonalities with intersex and transgender, but then also a lot of differences.
Okay.
And we like to say that the biggest difference of all comes with the human rights violations. Mm-hmm. And I have before told people, and it's fairly blunt, but when people are really being adamant about this, I'll say when they start doing lobotomies on transgender children before they're a year old, and forcing sex changes on these children before they're able to consent, then I'll have time for intersex of the brain.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. And it usually will make them stop and back up a minute and think. But really, the human rights violations is where I would draw the line between intersex and transgender.
But yet you call yourself transgender and intersex?
I'm transgender because I was raised in the female gender and I don't live that way.
Right.
I now live in the male gender.
Right.
And I'm non-binary because I don't worry about making my body or my behaviors fit into the boy box.
Okay.
For instance, I don't bind my breasts. Mm-hmm. I don't grow a beard because I burned that out in high school trying not to get beat up.
What do you mean by that? You burned it out?
I was given a home electrolysis kit.
Oh my gosh.
The hairs weren't coming out, and it was pretty much a daily fight in my house about
Yikes.
Having facial hair when I was a girl and getting teased about it in school and beat up and everything. And so I finally got really, really frustrated and angry. And I started doing that and pulling hairs, and it wasn't working well enough or fast enough. And so I added more salt to the water than what it said, despite the warnings that were printed there, because, warnings are for people that don't want to read it, right?
Right.
And I turned it up to the full level, which it said not to do. And I left the probe in each hair follicle longer, and I literally have nerve damage on my face from burning the hair off my face.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And you also identify as gay but asexual. Can you help us understand that?
I started using the word gay instead of homoromantic because when I would say that I was homoromantic, people were like, wait a second, so does that mean you date guys, or does that mean you date girls, or does that mean you only date intersex people, or do you only date transgender people? And so it kind of becomes a word game.
Okay.
I have emotionally involved relationships with men.
Okay.
But I found that physical intimacy, let's be blunt, sex,
right.
I actually feel ill for days and just off. And so I will have a very, I can have a very emotionally intense relationship and then be like, yeah, if you got that itch, you need to go elsewhere.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered the bases on our terminology here. So let's dive right into some questions.
Okay.
When did you first become aware that you were intersex?
It was pretty early. I think first it was like realizing that I was treated differently than other people.
By your parents, by kids at school?
By parents, by doctors, by teachers. It's kind of that you're different, but you don't really know quite how you're different.
Right.
I had to go to the doctor a lot for a lot of exams.
Okay.
And they were different than what other people did.
Okay.
And I was told that I couldn't tell people that my body was different. Even as a child, it was very secretive, very hush-hush. Mm-hmm. You don't tell people. I was told that people would be afraid of me.
Wow.
And so it was very, shh, we don't talk about that.
Okay.
And considering boys could say they were boys and girls could say they were girls, that was a very big clue that something was different.
Right. Were you raised in a religious home? Were your parents conservative? Or tell me a little bit about your church background.
My church background it's kind of interesting, sort of like the rest of it. My father's father was a Baptist pastor.
Okay.
Very, very, very strict Baptist pastor.
Okay.
Definitely of the God only made male and female.
Wow.
In which every time that he would say something like that, it would just leave me feeling like, where do I belong?
Wow. And what was the context that he would say that? Did you go to the church where he was a pastor?
Oh, yes. We went to the church where he was a pastor.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's the Baptist minister side, and then there's the other side where there was Methodist, congregational, polytheism. And I was drawn more definitely to the nature-based religions when I was a kid, because I found those to be way more accepting of me just as a human.
Right, right.
But in church and Sunday school and that sort of thing, people would talk about, the story of Adam and Eve and all of that. That always came up
Right.
Yeah, I mean, how often does that come up when you're in Sunday school?
Right,
That
all the
comes up
time, yes.
all the time.
Right.
It always made me feel like an outcast, because it was like God accepts everyone but you.
Wow.
Because you're something different.
Wow. Was there anyone who ever said to you during this time, Nick, this is the way that God made you. He made you the way that he wanted you to be?
People would say that, and then they would follow it up right with, but just don't tell anyone.
Okay. You're okay, but then the backhanded shaming.
Exactly. It was you're exactly how you're supposed to be, but by the way, you can't say this.
Wow.
God doesn't make any mistakes, but you really shouldn't tell people you're different.
God doesn't make mistakes, but he loves secrets.
Yes, exactly. God doesn't make mistakes, but we want to keep this on the down low. Yes.
So, Nick, I realized I was so interested in discussing with you all this terminology. I forgot to ask my first question I ask all guests is, where are you from? Where were you born and raised?
Okay, I was born in Ohio. Then we moved to Louisiana.
Okay.
And then we went back up to Ohio, and we moved so often that I could give you a list, but it would be sort of crazy.
Oh, wow.
But I was in my 8th school by the time I was in the 8th grade.
Oh, my gosh. What was the reason for all the moves back and forth?
My dad left when I was little, and so we lived with various relatives. And then when he did come back, we didn't stay in places very long, mostly because he struggled with employment and with dealing with being part of society again, rather than being the traveling bum.
Did you have any stability at all in your life, a grandparent or relative, or did your mother provide that for you?
I think my mom tried. I think the thing that needs to be understood, and I sound at times very harsh on my parents, but my dad struggled with having a child who was neither male nor female.
Okay.
He was very young and immature. I'm the youngest of the children, and I was born 10 days after my mother's 20th birthday.
Oh, wow.
So my parents were very young, very uneducated, and they were lied to from day one, from the moment of, is my child a boy or a girl? And the doctor said no. The lies began.
Wow.
My mom tried to be everything that she could, but she was also operating on the base of lies. She was doing what she was told was the best for me, which was forcing me down the girl path, which was alienating, because if you're a boy and you're being made to live as a girl, she was told that basically gender conversion therapy was the best way to raise me. Not accepting adversive behaviors was the best thing. I guess I felt displaced most of the time, very isolated, even in my family unit, because I couldn't really be who I was. And I felt as if I didn't really even know who I was. I have to give my mom a lot of credit. For as upset as I can be and as times as I can sound harsh on her, she really did do the absolute best that she could. My mom faced a lot of shame because she was told by the doctors, and this was standard for families with an intersex child at the time, don't have babysitters, move, do not tell anyone that you have an intersex child. So my mom was isolated from the start. How often do you have a baby and then hide that baby from people? How often do you keep your child with you constantly? She was very isolated. She, which also created a lot of resentment because, well, I kind of ruined her life. While I didn't intend to, that resentment was there. Why can't you just behave? I gave all this up for you. And so really, there's all these levels and layers of shame that you have to talk about when you're dealing with intersex.
Do you remember the first time your mom or a doctor sat you down and tried to sort of explain to you why you felt so differently?
The very first time that I was ever sat down by my mom with a book, and this is something that several intersex people have experienced, I guess you would say I was gender blind when I was a child.
Okay.
You're little and your teacher calls you up and everybody uses the bathroom at the same time and you stand in whatever line she tells you to go into and then that's the bathroom you use.
Right.
And it was the first time that I'd ever gone and used the bathroom on my own and I used the quote unquote wrong one.
Oh, wow.
Well, this led to, the school having a meltdown because
oh my gosh.
there were other students in there and oh my word,
Right.
Society is going to crumble.
How old were you?
I was in first grade. This was the very first time that I got to leave class all on my own and go to the bathroom all on my own. Got up and I went to a bathroom because it didn't make sense to me
Right.
that there were boys and girls. I mean, my brain just did not work that way. That there were boys and girls and each one went into a different bathroom based on their body parts.
Right, right.
My brain could not even grasp the concept.
And so you weren't specifically going to the boys' room. You just went to the closest bathroom.
Yeah, I just went to the bathroom.
Okay.
I'm like, okay, there's no line. I guess I can use either one.
Right.
I walk in and I do my thing and I leave. And pretty soon my mother's at the door and she's collecting it. She's very upset.
Wow.
And it's because a couple of the boys who were in there went to their teacher and told them that I was in their bathroom, and everybody knew I was different. All the adults did because that was like a big concern of when I went to school of what were they going to do with me.
Wow.
So she took me home and she had a book and it was a pamphlet and I've discussed this with other intersex people and they've just nodded and they knew the pamphlet.
Wow. Scary.
But it is very scary. And so we've shed a lot of tears over this and had a lot of laughter over the pamphlet. It showed a boy and a girl dressed in everyday clothes.
Okay.
And I was just like, okay, it's kids.
Right.
So, and then, the next page was them in their underwear and it was like, okay. And then the next page was drawings.
So there were photographs before, and then all of a sudden you jumped to drawings?
Photographs, and then all of a sudden it was drawings.
Okay.
And I realized that my body was not on either page.
Huh.
And I think that's the first time that it really clicked for me.
Wow.
But that was also the first time that I understood that I'm not a girl. Because she was like, this is what a girl does. A girl plays this way.
Okay.
Because I was always in trouble for not playing the right way, not sitting the right way, I could never understand, sit like a girl. And I'm like, you tell me I'm a girl and I'm sitting. So how do I sit like a girl?
Did your mom dress you in frilly dresses and bows and things like that?
Well, this was the confusing thing. We were very, very poor. And I have older brothers.
Okay.
And so I wore my brother's hand-me-downs for the longest time. So
Okay.
I was in boys' clothes, but I was told I was a girl, and then I'd be in trouble for not sitting like a girl and not playing like a girl.
Oh, wow.
And I could never figure out what they meant.
Right. But I can imagine in first grade, you're sort of presented with this reality of here's boys, here's girls, and it's just sort of put upon you that you don't fit either model. What was the conversation after that? Did she just leave you with that pamphlet? Was there a good cry? Was there a talk?
It was kind of like I'm different. And it wasn't earth shattering. I didn't want to be fixed. I didn't want, it's like everybody's like, did you want fixed? No.
Huh.
Because this is my body.
Right. Right.
It's like, there's nothing wrong with it. I think for me, it was just kind of like an understanding of, this is why people treat me different.
Okay. So in some ways, it's sort of everything made sense for once for you.
Right.
Right.
It was kind of like, I get it now. Okay.
So then that next day when you went back to school, was it the same or was your whole world different at that point?
I think my whole world was kind of different at that point, and I ended up being sent to another school for a while.
Oh, as a result of this instance?
As a result of the incident, but also they discovered during that time that I could not read. I was struggling a lot in school. And a lot of it was stress.
Okay, right, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. Try explaining that to people back in the, 80s, though. That really, they were like, why? No child would be stressed. when I went back to school after like a bout of summer school and after being gone for a little while, it was just kind of like nobody even knew what happened and nobody cared.
Okay.
I spent so much time trying to figure out how to be a girl.
Right.
That I think that's why they actually had to switch schools, because I was failing just because I was spending so much time trying to understand how I was supposed to fit into society now.
Right.
Because, I mean, that's a big curveball to throw at a little kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So at what point was the decision made, and who made the decision that you would be raised as if you were female?
My parents were given 3 days to determine whether they would call me a boy or a girl at birth.
Wow.
They just had 3 days.
Wow.
They weren't given any, I don't know when a solid diagnosis was handed out or anything else. I haven't really gone that far back yet. On one hand, it doesn't matter. On the other hand, I almost don't even want to know.
Right.
It is what it is. The timing of the diagnosis isn't important to my life.
So was there ever any time point where they maybe thought, gosh, we blew it. We made a mistake. We actually need to dramatically shift and start raising him as a boy?
I think there were times like that, but going back to the religious and the social.
Right.
And it still is the quote unquote preferred treatment plan for intersex kids in the U.S. to be forced down a gender path. Doctors will still do unnecessary genital surgery to remove body parts, create body parts.
This happens at what age?
They will do this anywhere from 3 months to some surgeries.
Wow.
Like, depending on what it is and the amount of quote unquote reconstructive surgery they have to do, an intersex child can face anywhere from 1 surgery to 25 surgeries, all the way up until they're 18 years old. They can be forced into it.
And these are not medically necessary?
These are absolutely not medically necessary. We say if they can pee, leave them be. Sometimes a child is born who has trouble urinating. Right. Okay, great. Fix the urination problem.
Right, okay.
But other than that, just leave their body alone. They're fine.
Okay.
I'm very lucky that my parents were poor. They couldn't whack and, chop anything off. Most of the time, intersex people are medically sterilized by the time they're teenagers.
Wow.
That includes removal of any and all gonads. If a baby is born with too small of a phallus, it gets cut off and they actually create a vagina for the child, which then has to be, surgically altered multiple times. It's pretty heinous, which is one reason why I'm extremely outspoken about intersex rights. These are pretty big human rights violations.
And I can see definitely the whole notion of non-binary, because that's really the root of the problem, right?
Right.
It's this whole notion that you have to fit track A or track B, and it's the sooner you're on that track, the better off you're going to be. And once you're on it, no looking back, you just go for it and you make it work.
Exactly. And, and transgender was seen as, this huge problem. The American Psychiatric Association still says that intersex people are not capable of having gender dysphoria. I was able to get what I call my Pinocchio papers, or my real boy letter. And that was basically coming completely unglued in a psychiatrist's office about the unfairness of it. Right. And I stormed out of her office and she caught me in the hallway and was just like, I'm so sorry. And I was just like, bite me.
How old were you? How old were you at that point?
I did not get that until I was 38.
Oh, wow.
I had to fight until I was 38. And then it was a fight even then. And I didn't believe her until, that she would actually give me the letter, until it arrived in the mail like 2 weeks later. I was just like, yep, she's blowing me off to, get me to shut up. Wow. And then it came in the mail and I was like, yay, I have my Pinocchio papers. But now I can't do anything with them because now Ohio back in the 90s actually passed laws that you can't change the sex on your birth certificate.
Oh, okay.
And with real ID letters under the Homeland Security, people who were born in states like Ohio and that have those laws, you can't fully change all of your IDs. So I could change, my passport, my social security card, that sort of thing. But then I still have that one piece of my identity that doesn't fit. Right. And that affects employment. It affects the ability to bank. It affects the ability to drive a car.
Wow.
So I still am legally female with a dead name because, well, the laws are not fair.
Wow.
And even I live in Colorado, and there are laws that are unless you undergo surgery, you can't change your gender. And I'm like, but I don't want to whack and chop my body. I've fought time to not do this.
Right.
So, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your spiritual journey over the course of your life. What was your first memory of church?
My first memory of church is actually about these shoes that I had to wear.
Okay.
They were patent leather girl shoes, and I'd never had girl shoes before. So
how old were you?
I was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old.
Okay.
And I took them off because they were hurting. They had those little buckles, and I had to wear those stupid socks with the lacy, edges. And I took them off because they hurt, and I didn't like the socks. Right. As I was getting blisters on my feet, and I stubbed my toe on a pew, and I ripped off my nail.
Yikes.
So that's like my first memory of church.
Wow.
And, so I'm sure we were there, before that.
Right.
But yeah, that was like the first, that's a clear memory of I was in church, because that pew, man, it bit me.
So with all the moving around that you did as a kid, did your mom try to find a church to take you to? Until
my dad came back, we went to a variety of places. There was a lot of go to church on Sunday because we're poor and we need something.
Okay. Wow.
Basically, my grandparents, my mom and her kids, her younger sister, her husband and her kids, and then her other sister, all living in the same house.
Wow.
And only like 2 jobs among them.
Wow.
Basically 7 adults and 7 children with 2 jobs.
Wow.
There was a lot of going to church because you could get a food basket.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really remember a lot about those times. Like I said before, there's also a lot of the polytheism because my mother's family is very diverse.
Right.
And so it depended on who we were with as to what we learned. So it was, I guess you would say it was kind of confusing, but in a way now as an adult, I'm really glad that I learned everything I did because I think my view of God is so much bigger.
What was your mother's family's religion?
There was Native. I think with them is when I felt like the most accepted.
Right.
Christianity has done a lot of harm to Native cultures.
Right.
One of the things that has been lost is all of the genders, because everybody was forced into the boy-girl box. Many times when I was a kid, I would be called a Dilba.
Can you spell that?
Dilbaa.
Okay.
You've heard the word Nadle or Two-Spirit?
Yes.
Dilba is the counterpart of a Nadle.
Okay.
Nadle is actually a person who was labeled male but grows into a woman, where a Dilba is a person who was labeled female who grows into a man.
Huh. Okay.
Those relatives caught on really early that I had been misgendered, and they were doing their best to honor me and accept me for who I was.
No.
I remember, one time there was a big argument because the family's diverse, and my grandfather is 25 years younger than his oldest brother.
Wow.
And so some of my cousins were like in their 50s and 60s when I was a little kid.
Right.
And so anyway, one of my cousins was chasing me around with his false teeth. All of the other girls were running around and running away, and I thought they were the coolest things ever, and I was like 4, and I was just like, dude, let me see those. Yeah. So he was just like, you got a soldier here, and all of a sudden, like, the whole family erupted, and it was just like, no, like, don't ever label that thing a boy.
Based on my limited knowledge of Native American cultures, someone who has 2 spirits is highly revered, right?
Right. In traditional cultures, they're highly revered. They were also the ones who would take in orphans. They were often very powerful energetically.
Right.
Healers, that sort of thing. So yes, very, very revered, very respected, seen as able to walk both sides of the spirit world.
And was that something that as a kid you became familiar with? And did that give you any sort of solace?
It did. I learned how to do a lot of energy work. Like my pastor's wife recently had knee surgery, and she called me over to ask if I could relieve her pain. So I went over and worked on drawing out the pain and putting in healing.
Right.
She was sitting there and she was like, I didn't think I actually feel anything. She's like, I can really feel like an actual pool inside.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, that's because everything's energy and I'm taking out the bad junk.
Right.
I think having that kind of gave me a little bit of a solace, but then that was something I had to hide from the other side of the family because that was seen as evil.
Wow.
You know, I mean, that was like witchcraft there, you know.
Right. At what point in time did you transition from dressing like a girl then presenting as, you know, quote unquote boy?
I struggled a lot when I was in school, especially in high school.
Okay.
And I'd attempted suicide 3 separate times. You know, just couldn't handle the stress of being alone, of being erased. You know, people are just like, well, what do you mean intersex erasure? And I'm like, well, think about even going to a clothing store. You walk in and there's a men's department and there's a women's department. But have you ever walked into a store with an intersex department? You know, it's like you can't even find clothes for yourself. I struggled a lot with all of those things, you know, plus the shame, the misgendering, the feeling horrible because I couldn't fit into the gender and believing that I had to fit into the gender or else I was leaving equally. And it was after that third attempt that, you know, I was sitting at the lunch table by myself and I developed, of course, quite the nasty attitude. And I was just kind of, I kind of had an air of, I dare you to mess with me. And so most people didn't. But there was a girl named Rose and she came over and she was just like, you know, she laid it right out there. She's like, my mom's a nurse. She explained to me what intersex is. And my grandpa committed suicide. So I understand, you know, kind of what you're going through because I watched him struggle. And she was like, I want to be your friend. And she just plopped herself right down. And I kind of hated her at first. You know, it was just kind of like, because I have this really good funk going on and here you are. How dare you?
Yeah, don't, I'm trying to wallow in my self-pity here. Get away. Right.
And she wouldn't let up and she wouldn't let go. And it took several weeks, but, you know, I found myself looking forward to lunch because she was going to be there. And then she brought a friend along and then she brought another friend. And then the final friend that she brought along was Tommy. Tommy was a gay guy. He looks at me one day and he's like, you're not happy, are you? And I'm like, well, duh. And he's like, you would be such a good drag king. And so he kind of gave me my crash course in cross-dressing. So then I started to cross-dress then, you know, for the remaining of my high school time. And it drove my parents crazy. And the more it drove them crazy, the more I liked it.
How do you get your kid to do something? Tell them not to do it.
Exactly. And so, you know, it made for some really tense times at home. But at the same time, I was angry. And this was a way for me to lash out. But I was also feeling like for the first time in my life, this is who I was. And then when I moved out is when I started to live as a man. And I actually took a job working for Tommy's uncle. And I asked him, you know, that very first day that I was living on his farm, I was like, can I start living as a guy? And, you know, can I go by Nick? Because I'd sat up in my barn apartment thinking up names all night long. And finally, when I was overtired and loopy, I started laughing hysterically over calling myself nickname. And it was, you know, the funniest thing I'd ever heard. And so, you know, then it became Nick. And now I'm, you know, it's Nicholas. You know, it's over the years Nicholas. I asked him and he's like, yeah, you can, but we got to get my nephew over here because you are way too girly. And, you know,
so all of that training to try and make you more feminine over the course of your entire childhood, it actually worked too well, and then you're presenting as too girly.
It worked.
Sort of the ultimate irony at that point.
It was like really funny because, you know, I would like wear a skirt and they would be confused because was I a guy or a girl, because I really wasn't acting girly enough to be a girl, but I was too girly to be a guy. And so I was just kind of in this quasi, he's like, you are just too girly. You know, so I mean, especially like, you know, up where everybody's got chew cans in their pockets and spitting and snorting and everything. You carried the can of chew whether you chewed or not. And that was the mark of being a man.
So I'm just curious that naming yourself and deciding at that point, I want to be known by my chosen name, Nick. Did you feel any sort of empowerment in being able to name yourself and then go from there?
It feels very powerful to be able to name yourself. Because it's kind of like, even if people won't accept it,
right,
in your head, you've got your name. You know who you are.
Right.
My dead name never fit. I was so detached from my dead name that I didn't learn how to spell it until I was in the 4th grade.
Oh my gosh.
It really wasn't until I was overtired and, slap happy that Nick just seemed the best, funniest name on the face of the earth. And it's still a hilarious story, but now I'm like, no, really, it's Nicholas.
Right.
That, and, I'm a complete Christmas freak. So, hey, around.
There you go. St. Nicholas.
Well, and I play Santa Claus at work. So,
awesome.
It's like, St. Nick gets to be St. Nick.
Do you remember the first time that you introduced yourself as Nick?
Yes. That's one of those, it gets burned into your memory moments.
Right.
I've been hanging out with Tommy, and he wanted to introduce me to one of his friends, and he was like, you can introduce yourself however you want to. I introduced myself as Nick, and I kind of stumbled over my own name.
Wow.
I wanted so badly to do it,
right.
But there was so much conditioning, so much internalized shame and fear that I kind of was like, Nick. and
the person like, are you sure that's your name? Because you sound kind of tentative, but.
Right. And basically that's what the guy said. He was like, really? That's your name? And I was like, it is now. And he goes, oh, okay, I get that.
Cool.
So, but he was also a member of the LGBT community.
Right.
He was a little bit more lenient, and I think it helped that I was with Tommy. Trying to tell my parents, they still call me by my dead name. They still refer to me as their daughter. They still introduce me to people as their daughter.
Wow.
The last time that I went home for Christmas, my mom had a dress for me to wear to Christmas Eve service.
Wow.
And that was just a couple years ago.
Wow.
But that goes back into the shame thing that they have of they feel that they messed up so horribly, and that's why I'm not the person who they thought that I would be.
Right.
That's really hard. So like when I don't go often back to see my family just because it's so, it's so upsetting. Like when I come back, I almost need a week just to get my head screwed back on straight.
Right. Understandably.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't even think it's a thing of my parents don't honor or respect. I really think it does go back to the shame that they were piled on with.
Right. Is there any notion in that of, well, if they were to start calling you Nick, then that would be an acknowledgement on their part that they really just made a huge mistake? That all the things that they tried to do over the course of your childhood were really far more damaging than they ever realized. And the only way they can sort of cope with that real sense of, oh my God, we screwed up as parents, is to sort of continue this facade that, no, actually, you're supposed to be this pretty little girl who wears dresses to church and not the man that you are today.
I think there's a lot of that. I've had some health issues, and I almost died from some of the issues a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And I had to talk with my mom about some of this. Mm-hmm. And because it started in childhood, and it was misdiagnosed because anything goes wrong with your body. Oh, you're intersex.
Right.
Oh, you're transgender. You're looking for drugs. Oh, you're gay. You're crazy.
Wow.
Oh, you're, and then you layer all these things on top. Wow. Oh, you're a migrant worker. You're drunk. Oh, you're native. So you layer all of these things, and
they see the label and not the person, and they're reacting to this label that they've put on you, and not sort of looking and say, hey, these are the issues that I'm having. I'm Nick. I'm this person. Listen to me. They say, no, I see you as a label, whether it's intersex, transgender, gay, whatever. It's the labels that they want to deal with and not the person. Right.
And I was having trouble with digestion, and so I actually got up to 400 pounds at one point, even though I was working fields every day, so I was working a lot, but I was still just obese, grossly obese. Mm-hmm. My liver started shutting down, my kidneys were shutting down, and I finally found a doctor, the one who actually was able to get my medical records for me, who was able to diagnose and begin treating what the problem was. He discovered that I actually went back to a problem that started when I was very, very young.
Wow.
And so we're still, working on fixing my stomach and that sort of thing. But I had to talk to my mom about all this. And she was like, we tried to do the best for you. and we know it wasn't good enough.
Right.
And that was kind of the end of the conversation. She couldn't handle anymore.
Wow.
And so I really think there's a lot of that they have so much internalized shame. And I mean, I can't even imagine it from their standpoint, because they've got a kid that is basically gone, that doesn't come around, that doesn't really call that often.
Right.
I mean, their hearts have to be breaking on that end, even as my heart is breaking, because it's like, I would love to be around my family, but it's so stressful that I can't live that way.
Right. Do you have siblings?
I do. I have one brother that I have absolutely no contact with.
Okay.
And then I have another brother that I have limited contact with. His wife is aware that I am intersex, or, of course they all know I'm intersex, but his wife is aware that I'm transgender and gay. But she's like, it's best if you don't, be open with him, because, he's very anti-gay, very anti-transgender. And she's like, if you want to have any contact with him, she's like, just don't. It's really weird that out of everybody in my family, my sister-in-law is the most accepting of me out of my relatives. Wow. And she's someone that I have only known since high school. She and my brother didn't even start dating until, well after high school. And it's just really, it's really strange that I have more acceptance from her than from anybody else.
So how is it that you've gotten to the point in your life where you consider yourself somewhat devout religiously, right?
I left church for a long time. When I left home, I was done. I was like, I'm never going back there again.
Right.
It took a lot of, I guess you would say, a lot of really hard experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I was a migrant worker for a long time, and I was traveling the country, and I had a truck and a trailer and a load full of goats. A guy that I worked with was like, at some point, read this. And he just handed me a folded up sheet of paper, and he was a very devout Christian, was always after me to go to church with him whenever we worked together. And I was just like, whatever. And I stuck it in my wallet, and that was the end of it for quite a while.
Okay.
When I got to a really low point, I'd been working for one rancher, and at the end of the job, he pulled us all together and let us know that his daughter was getting married, and he could not afford to pay us because her dress was more expensive than what he expected it to be.
Wow.
That we could show up like in a month and he'd pay us.
Wow.
Oh, it happens, unfortunately. My crew and I, we had worked for ages, and we just busted butt.
Right.
And we were down to like nothing. It's like I had enough gas to get to, get to town.
Right.
And so I'm sitting there, and I'm literally on the side of the road begging. And, and I was like really bad because everybody's like yelling out the window, get a job.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I had one. I didn't get paid.
Yeah.
And, and it was a string of circumstances like that. And I pulled that sheet of paper out because I was just, I was missing my buddy. And I was like, all right, he can drive crazy with the Bible stuff, but here we go.
Right.
And I read it, and it was a 23rd Psalm.
Right.
He just handwritten it out. And I read that, and I read it again. Being a shepherd, because that's kind of my primary focus, is sheep and goats.
Right.
I have a very different view on the 23rd Psalm than a lot of people do, only because I've lived it.
Right.
It struck me, and I started to cry, because suddenly I was like, if I could have a shepherd, then that would be awesome. And I wasn't even quite sure how to go about getting a shepherd, if I really wanted that shepherd, but it sounded really good.
Right.
And so that was kind of the start of my journey back.
And how old were you then, Nick?
I was 25 then.
Okay. What was the next step after reading that psalm? Did you find a church? Did you find your friend?
The next step was actually to kind of just sit on it for a while and to contemplate and, go about living life. I had a partner, and he was very definitely native, completely uninterested in anything Christian. And I kind of went along with that for a little while.
Right.
Just it was comfortable. We managed to get an apartment for a little while. We had our livestock over at one place that we were working, and it was long term. So our livestock was there instead of in the trailer moving.
Right.
We were in hotel rooms or in a tent or something like that. So it was kind of nice to, have a place that was ours. We moved in, it was right after Easter. And we kind of laughed. We got a good laugh because there was this little church that had sent out Easter cards too late. So we moved in and we got an invitation to their Easter service like a week or two after Easter. And I was just laughing. And so I put it on the table, and I threw it away, and then I came home and it was on the table. And I'm like, okay, this is going to sound a little weird, but coming from the background, it was kind of nothing to play with spirits.
Right, right.
They're there.
Right.
This postcard kind of became a game of I would put it in places and it would be back on the table.
Wow.
I got up one Sunday morning. I was like, I couldn't sleep, and Wolf was out. I got up and it's like standing on the table. I yelled at it. I was like, fine, I'll go. And it fell over. And so then I went to that little church.
So what was it like that first time that you, on your own volition, walked into the church?
It was really uncomfortable. I was nervous as crap.
Right.
I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I really kind of expected to be asked to leave.
Wow.
Because a lot of times, that's just what happened. It was a memory from childhood of the whispers and the discomfort. And I walked in and I thought it was a janitor because they were meeting in a school. And I walked in and there's this guy sitting there in a Hawaiian shirt and shorts. And I was like, is this where the church is meeting? He goes, yeah, I'm the pastor.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay, I can deal with this.
Yeah.
There weren't very many people there. They were kind of unnerved, because I was open. I was like, if they're going to kick me out, let's just get this over with.
Oh, wow.
Because I'd learned by then just to slap on my unicorn hat, sprinkle glitter, and just come out with it.
And what did you say? You said something to the pastor right then that first time, or after you?
Oh, yeah. I was like, let's just be honest here. If you're going to ask me to leave, I'm like, I'm intersex, I'm transgender, I'm gay.
Wow.
My partner is going to be getting home anytime. He's drunk.
Wow.
I just like
led with
it
your
all
chin there. It's just like, let me tell you everything about me. And
I was just kind of like, if you're going to ask me to leave.
Right.
Let's just get it out in the open and I'll just leave before everybody else gets here and the whispers start.
Right. Wow. What did he say to you?
He just kind of looked at me. He goes, I don't understand half of what you said, but welcome.
Isn't that a great reaction? Because so much, I think, of people's reaction is fear, and it's fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
It's that somehow accepting you means that the world is going to end, the fabric of society will be torn, there will be kids who will somehow be intersex.
Right? Like,
so it's like, all of a sudden, half the kids in the church are going to be intersex or transgender or gay or...
Right? Because the gay cooties will rub off.
Right.
Yes. And he was just like, I don't understand half of that. So I started going to church there. And then, of course, when that job ended, it was about the same time that church closed. It was too small to keep functioning. They couldn't afford to do anything. And, they were like, we'll just go into a bigger church. And I wasn't comfortable at the other church.
Okay.
We were leaving anyway. And so I was just kind of like, okay. And then church attendance was spotty for me after that because it totally depended where I was, what was going on, that sort of thing.
So understand that you are actually quite accepted at the Baptist church that you go to.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that church and how you came to find that church?
I came to this little tiny town several years ago as a migrant, and I took a farm manager position. It was shortly after my partner had died. Mm-hmm. I was working for a lady who was known for not paying her help. And when I took the job, I didn't know she had that reputation.
Oh, no.
But the pastor in town did. So it was my first winter, and I was staying in the farmhouse, and it had no heat, no running water, and it literally was below zero.
Oh, my gosh.
I was so cold.
Yeah. What state was that in?
It's in Colorado, northeastern Colorado. Okay. He showed up with a basket of food because he figured that it was around Christmas time and I wouldn't have any food. Mm-hmm. And so he just, showed up and was like, have a meal. Mm. And I'd been into town a couple different times, and I'd gone to, there's 7 churches in town. I was staying far, far away from the Baptist church because I grew up Baptist.
Right.
I wasn't going to go back to one. It's like I heard enough about the Adam and Eve thing. I wasn't going to go back. I'd gone to one, and they let me know that I was welcome to come, but they would prefer if I came late and left early.
Wow.
Just to avoid confusion.
And who said that to you?
The pastor.
Wow.
There was another one that, I'd been around town, people were, spreading rumors and, because, hey, there's a person we can't figure out whether it's a guy or a girl, and, hey, so small town, let's really spread rumors, especially in church.
Right.
So I went to another one, and they before service even started, I was asked to leave.
Walk me through how that came about. So you just go and you sit down in one of the pews and then...
Yeah, you go and you sit down at one of the pews, and one of the deacons will come up and very kindly inform you that they have a hard stance against LGBT.
Wow.
And that they do not want to confuse any of the children in church.
Wow.
Or offend any of the older people, and they will ask you to very kindly shuffle off.
Wow. That makes me so angry. I can't even see straight sometimes. That someone would think that they need to be the gatekeeper of who can commune with God.
Right.
It's abhorrent to everything that I read in the scripture, everything Jesus was about.
It happens to intersex people so often. Most of my intersex friends are like, why do you even go to church?
Right,
right.
Why?
And it's just, they have been talked to so horribly.
Wow.
I've had to confront pastors online. I'm constantly scouring for articles and that sort of thing written by Christians online about intersex, especially since the trans panic about bathrooms started up.
Right.
And I have found pastors writing articles that we are not created by God.
Yikes.
I have been told by pastors that it's impossible for an intersex person to accept Christ because we're not part of God's creation.
Really?
Oh, really?
My gosh.
I have been told that we are a result of the fall and that we are not part of God's plan for humanity.
Has anyone ever talked to you about this Nephilim, the Nephils?
Oh gosh, yes, I've heard that one too.
I had never heard that until this week, and this woman was saying that gay people are the result of Nephilims, and I had to look it up. I'd never even heard of that.
Oh, yes. Supposedly intersex people are the descendants of demons. That's actually one of the teachings that's going through the church right now, is that intersex people are the direct result of sex with demons, basically the Nephilim.
So as in sort of passed down through the generations, or is that your mother actually had sex with a demon?
Passed down through the generations.
Okay.
We are a punishment to humanity for that.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. We are.
I guess I don't understand. Other than the fact that you're not living this very, we're not falling into their notion of complementarity of you have a male, you have a female, the body parts fit together in the exact way, and then that's what creates life. What did they see as the real harm of someone who is intersex, who's really, like you said at the very, very beginning, you're just trying to live life?
Right. I think we're a threat to everything that they have in the Bible. However, when you look at Hebrew, there are more than male and female for the genders. Are you aware of all of the genders of ancient Hebrew?
No. Enlighten me and others.
So there is Zakar.
Okay.
This term is derived from the word for a pointy sword and refers to a phallus. It's usually translated as male in English.
Okay.
Nekevia. This term is derived from the word for crevice and probably refers to a vaginal opening. It's most usually translated as female in English.
Okay.
Androgynos is a person who has both male and female sexual characteristics. There are 149 references in the Mishnah and the Talmud.
Wow.
350 in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes for people with both sexual characteristics. Tum-tum is a person whose sexual characteristics are indeterminate or obscured.
Okay.
There's 181 references in Mishnah and Talmud.
Okay.
335 in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes.
It's not uncommon.
It's not uncommon, and it's definitely part of the scriptures.
Right.
Because, this is what we get the scriptures from.
Right.
And then there's the Ilonit, which is a person who has, and I may be pronouncing these a little bit wrong, I apologize if I am, a person who is identified as female at birth but develops male characteristics at puberty and is infertile. 80 references in Mishnah and Talmud, 40 in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes. And then there is Ceres. Now, there are two types of Ceres. There is the Ceres, who is Ceres Adam, which is made through human intervention, and Ceres Hama, which is naturally.
Okay.
And Ceres is a person who is identified as male at birth, but develops female characteristics at puberty and or is lacking a penis. And there's 156 references in Mishnah and Talmud and 379 references in classical Midrash and Jewish law codes.
Okay.
taking all of that and suddenly trying to condense that down into male and female.
Right.
Because each of these also has a gender identity along with it. This is just the body. And so then you add in the genders that go along. And it's this whole rainbow of humanity that gets put down into male and female.
Right. Wow.
When you look at the story of Adam and Eve, Adam was actually called Ha-Adam,
right.
H-A-Adam, and Ha-Adam has neither gender nor sex listed.
Right.
And the story of Eve, God didn't take a rib, God took a side, and Ha-Adam is described as having two faces. So when you translate it directly, the whole narrative of Adam and Eve changes and allows for all of humanity.
Right.
And people just get so stuck in this idea of God only made man and woman. It's like, yeah, God did make man and woman, but he also made everybody else.
Right.
And that's when people start losing it.
Right. So you've talked about some of the worst things that you'd heard from folks in the faith community. Do you remember a time when someone in the faith community told you something that really gave you some comfort and made you feel better about yourself, made you feel validated as a human being?
The pastor of the church where I'm going to now, when I refer to as I'm going to run to the store for my dad, I'm talking about going to the store for this guy.
Okay. Wow.
When I was first talking to him about coming to church, and, I just got to the point of I was going to pop in and talk to him in the office, because I know he showed up with a basket of food.
Right.
And his daughter invited me to sleep on her couch so that it wasn't freezing at the farm and that sort of thing.
Wow.
But I just wanted to make sure it was actually okay if I showed up on church on Sunday morning.
Wow.
I showed up in the office and I was talking to him a little bit. And he goes, "Are you going to try to convince people that you're gay?" And I'm like, "Well, I am gay, but they won't be." And he goes, "Okay. Are you going to try to convince people that there is some other sex?" "Well, no, because you are the sex you're born." And he's like, "Okay.
Right.
Are you going to try to convince people there's some other gender?" And I'm like, "No, because you're either transgender or you're not."
Right. Okay.
And he goes, "Okay, sounds good to me. I don't see what the problem is."
Wow.
And it was like, I like this guy. And I think for me, that was one of the first affirming times. It was just being accepted for who I am.
Right. Hey, Nick, thank you so much for this discussion. And I want to ask you the question I like to end my show with. What's one thing you think that people in the intersex, the LGBTQIA plus community can do to help build a bridge with people of faith?
Teach the truth about intersex in churches.
Right.
We're created in God just as we are. We don't need to be fixed.
Right.
We don't need to be hidden. We don't need to be isolated.
Right.
We don't need to have our families shamed into silence and guilt.
Right.
We don't need to be saddled with false guilt over having grown children who aren't living some weird expected outcome.
Right.
Oh, how dare you raise a child who didn't go according to what you thought their gender was.
Right.
We don't need to be told we're abominations.
Right.
If people can learn to understand that God created intersex just as he created everybody else, I really think it will also help them learn that God created everybody in the LGBT community.
Right.
Some pastors are beginning to learn that intersex people exist and that we're numerous. We're 1.7% of the population. Wow. We're not exactly rare.
Right.
If you walk into a church with 100 people, there's probably 2 of us in there, but we're in hiding.
Right.
It's so hard sometimes to think about the number of people who sit in churches every service and they hear derisive words spoken about their bodies, their emotions, their identities, their ability to love.
Right.
And so teach. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, I really appreciate your podcast. And, if you have any other questions, please ask me.
Yes.
But as far as other people, be teachable. Okay. Pastors, be willing to admit that you've been denying part of God's creation because you're afraid of us.
Right.
Acknowledge that, admit it, learn from it, and let's move on.
Right.
There's things that we really have to ask for, and it breaks my heart that I even have to ask for that.
Right.
But we really do.
Right.
I guess that is the biggest thing, is just teach.
That's a great message for folks. And I certainly hope that this little bit that I try to do with this podcast can sort of help some people understand that things are different and that people are different and that there's a lot more experiences than maybe what people have been exposed to. But it's really probably just because people are shamed into not talking about it.
Right.
And I think that's one of the big issues with all the sort of letters in our community is unless you are a cisgender, heterosexual, white male, your story somehow is an outlier.
Right.
Just sort of recognizing that all of these stories are valid and all of these stories need to be told and heard and studied and listened to and validated, and that we don't all need to try and fit our lives into this one particular mold that someone has created.
Right. I would encourage any intersex or any LGBT people who are listening is to remember that your faith will change. Your faith is not reliant on the people around you.
Right.
God doesn't look at you through the lens of people that hate you.
Right.
God looks at you through a lens of he loved you enough to die for you.
Right. Wow.
It doesn't matter how hateful people waving a Christian banner will act.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much you want to ditch the label of Christian and find something else.
Right.
It matters your relationship with God. So don't let anybody get in between you and God.
Right. That's a great point. There's a lot of room at the table, and the Christians, so-called Christians, aren't the ones at the door seeing who can come, checking names and see who can come in or not.
You got it.
So.
They don't have any kind of handle on that on that list of who gets in and who doesn't. Right. They're just making noise.
Thanks. On that note, I think I'll wrap the show. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks. Yep. You have a good day. Be blessed.
Thanks for listening to Be the Bridge. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love a positive rating and review on iTunes. I appreciate your support and feedback. For more details, visit brianpaytonjoyner.com or follow me on Facebook or Twitter. The links are in the show notes. Have a great week. And as my grandpa used to say, if you live life by your own rules, you're gonna be okay.